All right, tonight, I think every one of us in this room could probably say at one time or another in our life that we have been extremely angry. Anybody ever had that happen to you? Where you really just, somebody said, well, I got mad. But you know, there might be a little bit of difference between mad and angry. I don't know. It sort of looks like it may mean the same thing when you look it up, but you know, there may be a mad and then there may be an angry, you know. And so there's different variations of how I think people look at things. We can get kind of miffed or kind of upset, but then we might get actually to a point where we lose focus and we become very angry, mad. So tonight I wanted to investigate some of the things in the Bible that deals with anger. Now, let me just say before we start, there's nothing wrong with anger. It's a human emotion. And it's also a godly emotion. And I'll share that with you a little later on when we get a little further into our lesson. God became angry, and then God became mad. And so I'll share those things with you in just a few minutes when we get a little further along. But I want us to look all the way back to the very beginning. We'll start when we have the first actual thinking about anger. Look at Genesis chapter 4, verse number 6. This is, of course, the time whenever Adam and Eve had the two sons. And we know they were Cain and Abel, and then later they had Seth and others. But this is that time that this verse of Scripture sort of rolls out to allow us to look at one of the first episodes of anger. Now, when I say anger, that carries you a little further from being miffed or mad, and it causes you to do certain things and causes you to be misguided on what's right and what's wrong. And I'll share that with you in a few minutes with the biblical background of what we're talking about. Genesis 4 and 6. Gary Anderson in the back, I'm going to start with you.
Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast?
Okay. Of course, he's reading from a different translation of the Bible, but look at it. It's basically the same thing of what we're talking about here. But the Lord said unto Cain, why art thou wroth? Now, and why is thy countenance fallen? I like to use the word countenance and put fallen with it. Now, in this particular case, he became angry. His countenance failed. Now, let's talk about countenance for a moment. What do you suppose really and truly he's focusing on here when he says, why is thy countenance fallen? What does that sort of resonate with anger and madness? What does that mean? Attitude. Okay, it has a lot to do with attitude, true, but in reality, this is moving us in the direction that his real value has changed. He's not the same as he was before his countenance had fallen. His countenance was, his value with God been strained. We know what happened in this situation. We know that Cain slew his brother Abel. And we know it was because of jealousy and envy. And we know that in the Bible, in the King James Version, in the older translations, he says, why is your countenance fallen? Why is your value? Why are you in this situation where you no longer were where you once was with me, but now you're in a different light with me? Now, anger and madness really and truly changes our relationships with a lot of people. It changes our relationship with God. And somebody said, well, God loves us regardless. Yes, but what about your countenance? What about your value? What about your Christian living? What about how you are to conduct yourself as a child of God? Now, I get angry. I've got a terrible temper. Most of you know that. I've worked real hard toward managing that over the years as best I could. But many a time I would think that my countenance had failed, that my value with God and my relationship with God was strained because of anger because of getting upset and not acting appropriately as a Christian. Now, in this case, this is one of the first cases. Cain killed his brother because of envy. He took drastic measures, and drastic measures had caused his countenance, his value, to really and truly deteriorate with God. And so, as we start, we're looking at the changes that anger might bring about in our relationships with not only our fellow man, but with God Himself. I hear people all the time say, well, we've been married all this time, 50 years, and we've never had an argument. You know what I think about that? I think, Joe, that somebody just told a big one, didn't they? Because regardless of what we want to think, not everything is going to go our way all of the time. And sometimes when it doesn't go our way, it causes anger. It causes it, and it reflects on our countenance. Okay? Now, let's look a little closer. Anybody got any thoughts or comments before I move in another direction? All right, I want us to look at, go over to the book of Psalms. This is chapter 37. This will be verse number 8. Psalms 37, verse number 8. I only got 3 on my right side, so Linda, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll just move on up and pick you guys up. Okay, all right, she got it there. All right, now let's talk about this for just a moment. It used to be when I was a little boy, and my brother and I, my middle brother, that was he and I, we used to stay with my grandfather and my grandmother during the summer months. And one time there was a case where we had did something we weren't supposed to do, and we got a whipping for it. We were punished for it. And I can remember very well, as the old gentleman that I loved with all my heart, he said, "Boy, you're sad, but you best be getting glad." So I thought about that a lot of times. I know you're sad, boy, but you best be getting glad. And there was a reason behind that. That anger that I was experiencing and that sadness I was experiencing at that time was my own fault because of what I did. It wasn't anything really bad. We just broke a few windows. But then you start learning. He says, "Forsake wrath and fret not thyself in any wise to do evil." In other words, change your complexion, change your attitude, change from being mad, upset, wroth, any way you want to look at it. Change that. Change your complexion. Get glad over it. Get over it. Go on. Now, I've had people tell me for years, say, I get mad, I just can't get over it. I'm wondering about how this ought to work with God. God became angry, and boy, did He ever. And I'll share that with you in just a little bit. He became so angry that it repented God that it even made man. And He destroyed man from the face of the earth. Had it not been for Noah and his family, we wouldn't be here today. And it was all because of the way man was. And he wouldn't change. He wouldn't move. But then God Himself, He positioned Himself, even after He became so mad it repented Him that He made man, He positioned Himself to allow His Son to die, to get over that, to gain the forgiveness of sin. I read all day today. I hadn't felt good, and I've been in a chair reading all day today, and I thought, what kind of a God could look at this world in which we live right now and see all of what's happening around us, see all of the things that's going on, and see the changes that has been, in the early 70 years on this earth for me, the changes that have they all been good? Oh my. This is some of the worst times I've ever seen in the way people think, in the way people do, in the way people act. And not only that, of how it seems to me anger has positioned itself in a stronger capacity than it ever has before among our society. Doesn't take much for somebody to get mad at you for no reason at all. You ever had somebody get mad at you because you drove too slow? You were trying to be safe. You ever had somebody get mad at you because, you just didn't see things the same way they did? Or you didn't open the door for them or something? It's almost inevitable that anger is now in a different light than what it was a long time ago. And it may be that a man told me this morning, I was visiting one of my neighbors, he's 90 years old, he's a wonderful old fella. And he said to me, the problem is, if people had more time to work and less time to be idle, there'd be a lot less anger and a lot less madness in our society. He said if people was busy working, they wouldn't have time to get mad about things that don't really matter. They wouldn't have time to get angry over things that don't amount to a hill of beans. He said it's just the fact, Gary, that we reached a state where nobody works no more. And all they do is, and here I go, I always get in trouble with this technology that we have. This is a wonderful thing, but look what it's done to our country. Look what it's doing to our society. Look what it's changed with young people. They don't even know the difference between a boy and a girl anymore. And now, when you look at this, a lot of the anger we're seeing today is reflected in Proverbs 6 and verse 34. A lot of the anger we're seeing today, Proverbs 6:34. Michelle, I'll look at you on this one.
Jealousy is the rage of a man, therefore he will not spare in the day of evening.
I'm looking at something that the wise man wrote there that really should resonate with a lot of people. We're living in a time whenever envy and jealousy is taking a front seat. It's not taking a back seat. If somebody thinks you've got it a little better than they've got it, they don't like you for that. You ever known how it is that somebody could learn to hate somebody simply because they were good? I've watched that. And there are a lot of people who can't stand it. I mean, they're so envious and so jealous of somebody that might say something good about Bruce and didn't say something good about me. Well, I'm just as good as old Bruce. You see, there are a lot of people that can't really focus because of what we're talking about here. Jealousy and anger. And that causes, jealousy breeds anger. It does. It may not be an outward anger that you can actually see, but it may be that anger that festers and causes people to act so ugly that you could just know ahead of time that they got a real problem. Jealousy, he said, is the rage of a man. Therefore, he will not spare in the day of vengeance. We're living in a time wherever people think it's all right just to take whatever you got. You worked for it, you got it, but I want it and I'm going to get it. That's not the way it works. That's not the way God put it out there. I wish people could understand the true biblical principle of what we're talking about tonight, of how things ought to work with us as we move through life. If really we want to go to heaven, we're going to have to manage, there's going to have to be some anger management in our lives. And it's going to be a difficult process living in the times in which we live. But I want to look at some other thing. Anybody got a thought or comment before we move on? In Proverbs 12, now stay with me here for just a few minutes in the book of Proverbs because we're going to be there for a while. The wise man had a lot to say about anger. Proverbs chapter 12 and verse number 16. Elaine, I'll look at you on this one. Okay, a fool's wrath is presently known. Oh, me. Have you ever heard someone say something like this? Man, they act like a fool. Anybody ever? How's a fool act? Anybody got any idea about how a fool acts? They act a little bit out of character, don't they? They say things they ought not say and do things they ought not do. And that pretty much promotes how a fool is. Some things are foolish regardless. We can We can clarify that from the standpoint of how we are looking at things around us right now. A fool's wrath is presently known. It's easy to see foolishness in somebody whenever they act out in such a way, you know. There are people who can't carry on a normal conversation without hollering and screaming. Anybody ever been around somebody like that? Bruce, you don't have to say anything. Now, the reason I say that, you know, I'm kin to some of the same people Bruce is kin to. And you know, sometimes people, when you think about what we're talking about here, a fool's wrath is presently known. There's some people who can't carry on a normal conversation without trying to push it down your throat, trying to be a little bit off kilter with the way they act and the inappropriate words that are said. And sometimes the tone of voice. Have you ever noticed that sometimes you can actually see wrath and madness and foolishness and anger in the tone of voice that people use? You know, I mean, it's obvious that the Bible is so real and so full of so much wisdom. And anger management is one of those things that most of the time people just don't even want to reflect on. A fool's wrath is presently known. That means we're easily identified when we act a fool, you know. And then we see a prudent man covereth shame. What are we talking about here? Prudent man covereth shame. Sometimes people can hold their tongue, can't they? They can manage their tongue. It is hard, but sometimes we can't. And sometimes we can manage that by anger management, control, maintaining our control. I've been fortunate to live with someone who can maintain their control for years, and I've always admired that. You know, when really and truly I thought you ought to say something, but she was so wise with the way she handles herself that she doesn't say anything. Now, on my side, I'd say, well, I'll just tell it like it is, you know. But you see, look what we're talking about. A fool's wrath is presently known. But a prudent man, he covereth shame. Any thoughts or comments? That's been one of the hardest things to manage in life for a lot of people, self included, to admit when you're wrong. I mean, when you know you're wrong, to just come out and say, hey, I'm wrong. I made this mistake, and I'm wrong. You know, and wouldn't it be wonderful if we lived in a society like that? But we're living now with constant lies, constant cover-ups, constant, what we're talking about, constant fools, really, who don't mind just telling a lie out in front of everybody. 300 million people and tell a lie. Just tell them a lie. You know, well, it don't be no big difference. You see, and it's obvious. I mean, how many of us knows? I mean, we can know when we're being lied to. And so a fool's wrath is presently known, but a prudent man, he covereth shame. Now, Proverbs 14, 17, and 29 is two very important passages to deal with what we're talking about here. Libby, I'll ask you to read that. You want to read that for me? Proverbs 14, verse 17 and 29.
A quick-tempered man acts foolishly, and a man of wicked intentions is hated.
Okay. Now, of course, she's reading from a different translation too, but now it's basically the same thing. Let's just give some merit to what we're talking about here. Slow to wrath is of great understanding, but he that is hasty of spirit exalteth folly. He that is soon angry dealeth foolishly. Now, you know what a quick temper gets us? Acting like a fool, right? I mean, a quick temper causes that. And I'll tell you what, you know, it's just almost a given. Somebody said, well, it'll get better with age. Do y'all agree with that or not? It don't get better with age. Alan's shaking his head. You know, it's if you got that that fuse that's a little bit shorter than normal. It don't grow none as you grow older. It may actually shrink just a little bit. And so, you know, I think sometimes somebody that's soon angry does deal foolishly because they don't give much thought to what they do, what they say, and it's because that little short fuse, you know. And that's a difficult thing. That's a very difficult thing to deal with. A very difficult thing. And slow to wrath being of great understanding, you know, I'd get in trouble if she was here, but my son, Matthew, I would say this. The man, he's a grown man now, but he actually has reached a level in life that I never thought humanly possible with being able to manage himself. I'm talking about anger. We're using this as anger. People, you know, they curse him. Sometimes they even lash out. Sometimes they spit on him or something like that. You know, but he's able to just manage himself. And he's able to hold himself. Now, it doesn't mean that he doesn't have a fuse and won't get mad, because he can, but I don't know where he got it. I guess he got it from his mother or somebody along the way. But he's able to manage himself. And I thought I'm admirable of his ability to manage and not lash out and speak out. And I say, son, you got to defend yourself. He said, Dad, what's the use? It's still going to go, the same results are still going to be the same way, regardless of how I say, what I say and how I act. He said, the results is going to be the same, you know. So, I mean, you know, and I'll use that as an example. He's one that I do know about that, and like I say, there's others too. Some in the church here the same way. Some in the church here have the ability to manage themselves in a situation like this. He that is slow to wrath is of great understanding. Maybe they're able to look a little deeper to see the flaws of where it's coming from, you know. And I think Proverbs 15:1, it carries some weight in this. Bobby, you want to pick that one up for us? Proverbs 15:1. Go ahead and read verse 18 too.
1 and 18?
Yeah.
A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger.
Okay, read verse 18.
A wrathful man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger allays contention.
Okay. If you look at this soft answer turning away wrath, when you holler at somebody, speak loud to somebody, what do you expect back? What happens most of the time? They're going to respond back, aren't they?
Probably a little bit louder.
Yeah, probably a little bit louder. A soft answer. You know, the tone, it makes a difference. The tone of the voice makes a difference, you know. You know, when you get hard of hearing like me and George, sometimes people have to speak a little louder. We have a difficult time hearing. But you know what? It's not because we want to lash back. We're just glad to hear what they're saying, you know. But really and truly what we're talking about here, the soft answer that turns away wrath is being able to respond when you know that that's not what they're trying to do to get you to hear. They're actually lashing out, you know. And if you can respond in a manner that's a little different from what ordinarily people do, I think it can make a difference. Y'all agree with that? It does, doesn't it? And when Bobby was reading that second part right there, a wrathful man stirreth up strife. I guess the best way I know to put that, have you ever been around somebody that had a chip on their shoulder? You know, we've heard that saying all of our life. You know, they carry a chip on their shoulder. You know what that means? For some reason or another, there's some form of inferiority complex in their lives to the point where they carry that chip on their shoulder. And whenever it comes down to what we're talking about here, he says, a wrathful man stirreth up strife. he's ready to, at any given time, lash out because he's wrathful. He's got that chip on his shoulder. There's something somewhere in their life that's not, their program is not really programmed right. They're looking for some reason to be angry. You know, I've witnessed a couple of things since I've been working with the policemen up there that really and truly, it really bothered me. When a policeman is doing everything he can to calm a person down and to, you know, appropriately conduct his business of helping to enforce the law, and the person just can't get it in their head that they're not trying to hurt them or harm them. They're trying to help them. They're not being mean to them. They're not roughing them up. They're not doing anything. But man, you talk about tongue lashing and name calling and all kind of, and finally, you know, you get to a point where you think, well, you know, how much more can this guy take? You know, I witnessed one particular fella take a cussing, you know, just really bad words and all that stuff go on, and it's everything but physical abuse. And the man said, okay, you know, I understand, you know, just, you know, think about it, calm down. You know, how do you do that? But he said, soft answer turns away wrath. You know, when really and truly you'd think, now a lot of them don't do that. Don't get me wrong, a lot of them don't do that, but I witnessed that firsthand of somebody who had self-discipline that could manage that. You know, a lot of the others would just kind of, you know, crack them on the head and handcuff them and throw them in the safe. You know, but now I've witnessed people that can manage themselves this way, and I thought, that's admirable. I mean, you know, how can you manage that? A soft answer turneth away wrath, and you know, self-control, soft answer. You know, self-control has a lot to do with that. Of managing oneself in such a way that you can give that soft answer. You know, and you know, it's a very difficult process, but it's something that Christians need to work on. And I agree totally with what Bobby just started out with. That's the Christian way. If you think about Christ, here's a man on the cross. They've tortured him to no end. And, you know, they've done everything humanly, inhuman to him. But there he is in the situation he's in. And he says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. When really and truly he could have spoke one word and he could have annihilated all of them. I mean, it would have been over with. There wouldn't have been any way that it could have ever happened. But, you know, you think about somebody that could manage themselves in that situation. And that's why I say, and I used that as an example a while ago, I've always been admirable of someone who had good self-control, because it really pushed their level of respect among people who had a little bit of intellect to understand it. It pushed their respect way up here. And I think that's part of being successful in life. If you can ever reach that plateau when people have the utmost respect for you when they hear your name, this has a lot of bearing on that. And that carries a lot of weight with success of how people look at you and how you reflect with that. It's a good point, Bobby. Any other thoughts or comments? Yeah, that's what I was thinking about, David. When you get so angry at something, it might not be another human being, but then you just lash out and you tear it up, and then you sit there and think, well, what in the world was I thinking? It's going to cost me 5 times as much to fix it now as it would if I hadn't done it to start with, you know. That's true. A lot of times they're not. You know, I've seen some of those things over the years. You know, one man in particular, you know, his truck wouldn't crank, and he was running late, and he got so upset and everything, he just took a hammer to beat the headlights and the windshield out of his truck. And then the next day when he come to work, you know, somebody asked him what happened, and he said, well, as a fool, broke the window out of my truck and knocked the lights out. They said, well, who done that? He said, I did. I never will forget that. He's dead and gone now, but he said, there's a fool done that. Sometimes there is a point of being able to put yourself into a situation where you have to be somewhat of an angry individual. I mean, my anger toward what happens in our society, you know, I have a real problem with that. And, you know, the reason for that is because it's wrong, you know. And, you know, the anger that I have toward our leadership and things of that nature right now is because that's wrong. And Alan has a point there. If it's wrong, we have to point that out. But there's a way to point it out.
I'm not saying go stick your fist through the wall. That's
No,
not what I'm
no.
saying. I'm saying that
Our mannerism.
our mannerism should not get out of kilter, but there's a time internally that we should be angry about,
Oh, yeah.
about certain things occurring. I mean, Christ, you know, and you may be going to cover that, you know.
He became angry.
He became angry.
He cast them out of the temple. And God became angry and annihilated man, you know, because of what man did. And I was hoping to get to that, and I will. No, but no, you're exactly right. There is a time, but right now we're focusing on the beginning of self-control, and that's one of the things that I've always tried my best. God had a plan when He gave me my partner in life. He knew, you know, I needed help, and He gave me the right partner, you know. And a lot of times, when you look at this, Proverbs 17:14. Let's look at this. Gary, I'll ask you if you will read that. Can you read that?
Proverbs 17:14.
It's kind of unique. Now I know that people they laugh about this verse of scripture, but that's the reason I got Gary to read it.
The beginning of strife is as when one layeth out water. Therefore leave off contention before it be meddled with.
We know what this represents, don't we? He said the beginning of strife is as if one letteth out water. You know, we know what that is. And he said, therefore leave off contention before it be meddled with. So, I mean, get over it before it reaches that level, you know. And sometimes it may require, you know, as we read in the Bible about, and Alan has a point about being angry, but you remember what the Bible says about be angry and sin not. But then when we're smitten on the cheek, you remember, I can almost guarantee you not many people can continue that other part. When we're smitten on the cheek, what are we supposed to do? Turn the other cheek. I knew you were going to say that. It doesn't say what to do after that. That's true. But at the same time, how hard would it be to manage yourself in this way? I mean, that's a very difficult process. And that's why, you know, the understanding that we have is, you know, letting out water. You know, we know basically what he's saying. It's of no value. I mean, it's nothing. Verse 19 of Proverbs 19. Proverbs 19:19. Let's see, Bruce, it's your time.
Man of great wrath shall suffer punishment, or if thou deliver him, yet thou must do it again.
A man of great wrath. And he says, deliver, and yet thou must do it again. You know, I don't know how hard it is for people to change in life. I know I've tried to change as much as I could over the years and haven't done too good with it. But I know that, you know, this is a constant thing. This is an ongoing thing. Anger management is not something that we can turn on and off. It's something that we have to deal with on a constant basis. You know, and if we don't manage it properly, you know, it will eventually cause problems. You know, and you know we're seeing it every day. Like I say, I never knew I wouldn't want to be in a position of having to be a policeman to police things. And the reason for that is, you know, I don't know if I could manage that. I just don't see me being that that real person to be able to be self-controlled. Because, I just think differently than a lot of people. Because you get angry at what people do, and you want to punish what people do, and that it's very difficult to deal with. And society has reached a point where it's very, very difficult to control. All right, let's look at Proverbs 22 and 24. Proverbs 22 and 24. I'm back to my left hand side. Kimbo? Now, verse 25 tells us why. Go ahead and read that, Kim.
Lest thou learn his ways and get a snare to thyself.
Okay. I've often said, be careful who you run with, And I learned that at an early age, thank God. But make no friendship with an angry man, with a furious man thou shalt not go, lest thou learn his ways. And how many times have we seen a good person become not such a good person anymore simply because of his surroundings or her surroundings and the people that were there in their lives? The influence factor is so great among our young people today. I mean, you know what's so sad? I'm scheduled to speak at Memorial Day celebration on Saturday night, 6 o'clock. They don't teach history no more in school. They don't teach things about where we came from and what happened and who did what to get us where we're at today. They don't tell people, how America was managed in a time whenever people really and truly had pride, and they were looking at the flag, and really and truly they could tear up over a soldier that lost his life fighting for the freedoms that we enjoy. That don't happen anymore. And the Bible carries us to a point where we can understand a little bit more about it. I mean, make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man thou shalt not go, lest we learn his ways. And like I say, I never knew the other day when I was down there speaking at the police celebration, I never knew what happens with people who just, for some reason or another, they need to be taken out of society and put somewhere until they learn better, because they're so angry and so upset because they don't really have a good reason to be that way. And that's one reason I wanted to look at this tonight. I see people that are so angry and upset right now, they don't really have a reason to do that. They don't have any reason to do it. It's not a time when we need to be mad. It's a time when we need to be thankful, and I'm reminded of that a lot, So this is really what the Bible is for, is to teach us how to better manage things in our lives. Any thoughts or comments? Let's just real quick bump up over there to what Alan was talking about a while ago. Let's go to 2 Samuel real quick, because my time's going to run out on me if I don't. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse number 7, most of us are familiar with this. But I want you to think about God in anger for just a moment. Now, somebody says there's a reason to be angry, there's not a reason to be angry. But I want you to look at this particular passage. This carries us to a place where we can understand a little bit better of how things work. Sister Galloway, would you read that for us? 2 Samuel 6, verse number 7.
And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God smote him there for his error, and there he died by the ark of God.
Now, this doesn't seem reasonable in some sense of the word, but this is God. And God said, don't do that. Don't put your hands on that. This is the Ark of the Covenant. They're moving it. And we know that in the situation Uzzah was in, it probably was a human thing, because this thing got off in the ditch and started to tumble, and he put his hand down and he touched it. But the problem was, God said, don't do it. And when he said don't do it, he meant it. And so the anger of God here is reflected in such a way as disobedient. When God says to do something, He means to do it. When He says not to do something, what do you suppose He means about that? Don't do that. And I use this as an example. I probably wouldn't had I been, in that position. I don't know how I would have reacted, but a lot of times, this is one of those times when God said, don't do it. He became angry because of disobedience. And somebody said, well, it was unintentional disobedience. It may have been, but it was still disobedience. And that's why, today in our society, when we realize the laws of the land are there to govern us. Now, not all the laws of the land do I agree with, but the laws of the land are there. And whenever the Bible teaches to obey the laws of the land, we really and truly don't have a choice. It says we ought to obey God rather than man. The time is whenever we disobey man is whenever it's difficult to see how God deals with that, because God says you obey God rather than man. And so if their laws doesn't coincide with God's law, I have a right, but I don't have a right if man's law coincides with God's law. And so anger management is going to carry me to a point in life where I need to obey the laws of the land as long as they coincide with God's. When He said, thou shalt not kill, the law of the land says, thou shalt not kill. I got to obey that. I need to do that. And we're talking about intentional, of course. We're talking about things that God says, constitutes like murder. That's one of the things that will keep us out of heaven. But there's so much to anger management and how it should be. Let's go to Ephesians 4:26 real quick. Diane, would you mind to get that? Ephesians 4, verse 26.
Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath.
Read verse 31, too.
Let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice.
Okay. He gives us some direction here, but he says you may become angry, but don't let the anger result in sin. And then he says, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. In other words, how long can I stay angry? How long can I stay angry? He said, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Manage that. Manage that anger. Don't let it fester. Don't let it continue. Don't let it stay. Manage that anger. But then on the other hand, if you look at what he's talking about here, he says, you just let all the bitterness and the wrath and the anger and the clamor and evil speaking, you put those things away with all malice. So it does carry a lot of weight to do what God says. And it takes a lot of self-discipline to do what God says when it comes down to managing ourselves. It takes a lot of discipline. Any thoughts or comments? Okay, let's talk even about praying. 1 Timothy 2, verse 8. 1 Timothy 2, verse 8. Amy, I'll stay over there since I haven't called on you tonight. 1 Timothy 2, verse 8. Judy, you can be looking at James 1:19, and I'll get you next.
1 Timothy 2:8.
Yes?
I will, therefore, that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting.
Y'all think your attitude with anger might reflect on how your prayers are heard and answered? I think I've been scolded a lot of times. My little wife scolds me about this. Don't pray angry. Don't pray angry. And sometimes I do. Sometimes I've been guilty of that. When to pray angry, say, God, what in the world? But can't do that. He says you put yourself into a position where you pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. So, we got to get our attitude right, even in our prayers, as far as anger is concerned. Okay, Miss Judy, I'll get you to read James 1, verse 19 and 20.
James 1, 19 and 20. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God.
Those are powerful, powerful words. Be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. And a lot of times anger gets away with us before we know it. We are swift to hear, but sometimes we're not so slow to speak. We're not so slow to wrath. And when you think about this, he says, the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. So, anger can really hinder us in our Christian living. And, I teach this lesson not just for the sake of all of us, I teach it especially for the sake of myself. To be able to manage well in the situation of trying my best to teach somebody what it's going to require to go to heaven. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is for somebody to see you and manage yourself in such a way that maybe they want to be able to manage themselves in that way. I mean, your influence factor really diminishes the way you act, the things you say, the way you portray yourself, from a standpoint of how this all works, Any thoughts or comments? That's a very good point, David. Let's go back one more time and look at God for just a moment. In Exodus 33 and verse 5. Joe, we hadn't called on you tonight. If you will read Exodus 33 and 5, we're going to look at this. And remember, we're looking back at God and anger here.
The Lord said to Moses, say to the children of Israel, you are a stiff-necked people. I could come up into your midst one moment and pursue you. Now therefore take off your ornaments, that I may know what to do to you.
Okay. Now, God hated idolatry. And he hated, he warned the people consistently, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And these are his people. These are the Jews. These are the people that he made the covenant with in the very beginning. This is God's people, and Moses is leading these people. And then God reflects on how he looked at the people. And this is how we see the anger of God sometimes. He said, you're a stiff-necked people. Stiff-necked people. Now, I've often thought about that. I don't know if some of these other translations have a different word than stiff-necked. But nevertheless, what he's talking about, he says, they just won't listen. They won't do. It's upsetting. They're stiff-necked. They're going to do what they want to do instead of what I tell them to do. And this is God. And he's upset with them. He said, I'll come up into the midst of thee in a moment and consume thee. Now, they had to know God's power. They had to know his power. But they also had to know something about how God looked at things. He was angry with these people. They were very much into idolatry and ornamental worship of things that other gods and stuff. And this was when he said, Moses, you go back and tell them. And so, there is a time, just like Alan said, there is a time when you have to point out when the wrong is wrong. And conducting oneself in how to point out the wrong is a good way of looking at self-control. But the wrong has to be pointed out. This is what God's doing here. He's upset with these people, and he said, you're stiff-necked. I'll come in there and consume all of you. I'll kill you all. And so it does make a big difference of how things should work. And God's intent was, as we said over there with Uzzah, do what I say. Don't don't not do what I say and expect to get by with it. So we'll close out tonight by simply saying that, anger management is a very, very important part of being a Christian and going to heaven when we get there. And, and I hope and pray that doesn't keep me out. And that's been a very difficult process over the course of time. As I've grown older, has it gotten better? I don't know that it has, but I do think differently now than I used to. The accomplishments of being angry, I don't see much accomplishment anymore in being upset and angry anymore. And Mother and I have talked about this a lot of times. When you can just sit down and have a conversation without screaming and hollering and yelling, you're a lot better off than if you sat down, scream and holler and yell. I mean, you're a lot better off. You may be upset, but if you can just sit down and have a conversation and point out your upset aspects, and not show out with it, it makes all the difference in the world. No, ma'am, and that's been a problem for lots of people over the years, especially in our physical family. Mother and I, we both would agree with that. When you can't talk it out, when you can't talk to nobody, how you expect to get any problem solved when you can't talk to somebody? You can't solve the problem. It won't work. Okay, our time is up. Thank y'all so much. I enjoyed the conversations and the points and being involved in the teaching of the lesson.